Yeah, so this is the 10th bottling, and typically it's a 3 vintage blend, with Petite Syrah being the dominant variety, Syrah second, and a very small amount of Cabernet. And we try to blend over a 3 vintage period and sort of cherry pick and age a little differently. And, you know, it's our most expensive red wine. So it's the opposite of what the rest of the wine world does.
It's absolutely gorgeous.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
So this particular blend is 53% Petite Syrah, 42% Syrah, and 5% Cabernet. And that Petite Syrah is from that vineyard's about 2 miles from ours that we mentioned. The vintages in it, 43% is from 2016, 42% is from 2017, and 15% from 2018. And
the word annate
Fruit up front.
Brighten
means vintages
in Italian.
In Italian, so that therefore the name. That's kind of why people always ask us, where did you come up with the name? And so since it's a multi-vintage blend, we decided to call it vintages.
It's great.
Super cool.
So we came up with the idea of calling it vintages, and we're like, well, we can't just call it vintages. So then we like, okay, let's do an Italian translation. And then that's where the word annate came from.
That's really cool.
Wonderful.
So we only make 2 barrels, and we have really so few barrels in the cellar at any time of the year that we have the luxury of tasting every barrel about every quarter. And for about 6 months out of the year, we'll have 2 vintages. And then for another 6 months in the year, we'll have 1 vintage of red in the cellar. And when we do these quarterly tastings with our wine thief and wine glasses, we have a piece of chalk with us. And if a barrel stands out either for its aroma, or it's got a really juicy middle, or there's something just silky delicious about this long finish, we consider it for annate, and we'll put an A in chalk on the barrel. And we might only mark 2 or 3 barrels, and then we, you know, another 3 months later, we do the same thing, and we might keep those first marked barrels, or we might change some of the markings. When we get around to March, before we bottle this wine and bottle our Cabernets, we'll take small sample bottles of those barrels that we've marked, and we do some blending trials and blind taste and pick the winning blend. And then the next day, in the winery, we siphon out so many gallons from the different barrels to assemble 1 60-gallon barrel. And then we age that for another year. And it's marked, you know, whatever our annate we're currently on, we have an annate
Vintage you're on, yeah.
barrel that we're aging.
Yes. Whatever Roman numeral you're on.
Exactly. And then the following year, we keep doing this exercise, and it's kind of a record keeping challenge, but I keep detailed notes. And
that's why I let Helen do the description.
So yeah, we only get 50 cases roughly when we bottle.
So most of it is for our direct to consumer business, but our wholesaler insisted that they get a small allotment of it. So it goes just to a handful of accounts really in California.
That's great.
So what do you think of it? Can you?
I think it's wonderful. I don't think Laura's going to like it, so I'll take her glass because I don't think you're going to enjoy this at all.
You can fight right now.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the whole idea about how vintages get whitewashed. And I remember this, one of the distinctive wine lessons I learned, I was up in Napa, probably in the probably 2002, 2003 time frame. Mm-hmm. And I went to a winery and became friends with the tasting room manager. And he poured me 3 glasses of this winery's Cabernet, the 97, the 98, and the 99.
And the 98 was the crappy vintage, right?
98 was the crappy vintage. 97 was the vintage of the century.
Yeah.
99 was close behind, right?
Yeah.
The 98 far and above outshined both wines, not even question mark, but it was
Yeah.
all because where this one vineyard sat on the edge of Silverado Trail, up and behind a peak, and it got the right amount of rain, the right amount of whatever it was, but it was an incredible Cabernet. And the 97 and 99 were good, but they didn't hold
Yeah.
a candle to the 98.
That's funny.
The funny thing too about that, 1997, we were in Napa then.
I was at Chimney Rock Winery and you were at Atlas Peak.
1997 was one of the biggest crops in like 15 years.
Huge.
And it was a hot year. So
Dark
thank goodness that it was hot, because it wouldn't have ripened the crop. But it was like everything lined up that year. And that, because normally these giant crop years can be a little more simple and not as intense. And I always laughed because, everybody was raving about the 97, and if the consumers really knew, it was like the opposite of what we all tell everybody, right? Oh, we have a small crop and you have to be able to do this with, and 97 was just like, throw all that stuff out the window. And, it still made a really nice wine. But I agree with you. The 98s were really, in general, there were a lot of those wines after they were aged about 5 or 6 years, they were so much better than the credit they got.
That's what I said. And honestly, what I found with some of the 97s that I had bought, they didn't age as well as the 98s.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that some of those had lower acid.
Maybe.
pH.
Yeah.
97s. So they might not age as long.
Yeah. The 98s they got rain late that year, at the end of harvest. And, the wines just weren't as big and powerful. The sugar content.
Unless you had the patience with it to let it sit.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of winemaker, or a lot of vineyard managers didn't have the patience to let it go another 3 weeks.
Right?
Yeah.
They were afraid of rot.
And you have to let the soils dry and hopefully get wind. And yet, Cabernet's pretty rugged. If it's Pinot Noir or Chardonnay, forget it. The stuff, you can watch the botrytis grow on it, by the hour. But with Cabernet, it's pretty forgiving. It just, it just depends on how late in the season and can you let it hang that long, to let it kind of come back.
It's interesting you say that, because my friend who was telling me about this one vineyard said it was in a vineyard that got good sun, like any vineyard, but also got a lot of wind.
Mm-hmm. That helps.
Yeah.
So it seemed like that maybe in retrospect, why that vineyard shined so well is they waited to pick it, and everything dried out thoroughly.
Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of have to let it recover, because if you get a lot of rain, which when they get rain events up there late, it can be 2 or 3 inches, and they were just getting close to harvesting. And so everything gets kind of diluted and you kind of have to let it, dry out.
Yeah.
Another vintage that got panned was 2011. And it's so unfortunate because it was a spectacular vintage for the Central Coast down here. And yet some of the larger trade magazines kind of wrote it off.
It's Jim Lauby.
And it just why do they say those things? Because it misleads consumers. And I think we've had a couple of really nice 2011s from the North Coast.
Yeah.
It didn't really hurt everybody up there.
And you know what?
It was an excessively cold, rainy year.
What I always like to say is those are the years where you separate the great winemakers from the mediocre.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the great vineyard managers.
Mhm.
So it's it's just kind of a shame that it gets, everything gets lumped in like that, because it just gives people the wrong impression, and you should just let people make their own decisions.